know I got a lot of information from you about COVID when we were in Vegas 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And I remember you telling me, hey, once you get vaccinated, every time you breathe in,
Yeah.
you're boosting your immune system. And I was thinking about you when I just heard about my daughter, and I'm thinking, do I just breathe this in because should I listen to Dr. White, or like should we still, once we've been vaccinated and boosted, do we do what we can to avoid it, or do we do what we can to prime our immune system?
If you're gonna spend all the time avoiding it, you're gonna spend the rest of your life avoiding it because it's going to be with us forever. It's unlikely that we're going to be getting rid of this thing. We're going to be living with it like the flu. So scientifically, it makes a lot of sense if you've been exposed and if you've been vaccinated and boosted to keep getting exposed. That's how communities deal with parasites and other infectious diseases. I'm sure you've seen the movie or read the book, The War of the Worlds. Well, it was a radio show initially.
Oh, I wasn't, I think it came out in the 1930s, so I wasn't around.
It caused a big panic, because the Orson Welles put it out on the radio, and people who tuned in late thought it was real and there was real aliens attacking. But the idea behind that is that we've earned our place to live on this planet, and attacking aliens have not earned their place because they have not evolved with all the pathogens over these millions of years. And so their immune system just was not capable of battling just the basic bacteria and viruses that we're exposed to all the time. I mean, there's trillions of different viruses just in the ocean. We're exposed to, billions of different bacterial species, but they're commensals. We're just used to them. And in fact, we have them in our guts, right? And also mitochondria were originally bacteria. They just became assimilated into our cells because it was beneficial. They made energy. Our cells needed energy. So it was beneficial. So we've evolved with these things. And, as we continue to evolve and we continue to get exposed, we'll eventually reach a point where we balance out, that everything becomes like a commensal and it's non-pathogenic. The reason things become pathogenic is when an alien species comes in, or when the Spanish go to the United States, at the very beginning, and are exposed to pathogens that their immune system has never seen before, or their ancestors' immune system has never seen before. And so it becomes very, very virulent. It destroys and liquefies the tissue, even though the natives are not affected. That's why a lot of Native Americans died with the pathogens that the Spanish and the British brought over. So same thing with COVID. If you are continually exposed, we should get used to it. But unfortunately, it's very related to the flu. It's not a flu. It is not a flu. It doesn't affect us like the flu. It's a vascular disease. However, it does mutate, kind of like the flu. And so if it keeps mutating away from the memory cells that we've developed, every time we get a new strain, we're going to get reinfected and be symptomatic.
So like the secret, I guess, to living, like medicine, and I think one of the things I know about you is you're always on this quest to extend longevity, have people live longer. And I think it's just really, it's not the battle against aging we're worried about. It's like, how do you stay away from these potholes in life? How do you not get sick? Because it's like, why do we die? We die because eventually our immune system breaks down and we get taken over. Is that pretty much it?
That's pretty much it. We have an evolutionary conserved mechanism within our body that is conserved through evolution with almost every species alive on the planet to age us and remove us from the population. It's not an accident. It was positively selected by evolution as a mechanism to switch us off, because you can't just flick a switch, but there has to be an off button to get rid of us so that resources are available for the next generation. And so we evolved aging as the mechanism by which our body recognizes that we've reached sexual maturity. We've had an opportunity to reproduce. Now our time is over. And
get the hell off the stage. It's time for the younger ones.
The crook, the sheep crook, pulling you off the stage. That's exactly it. So we don't care for that anymore. It's no longer of benefit to our species to remove us from the gene pool. It's more beneficial to keep us around, because as we age, we generate and accumulate knowledge. And that knowledge is very critical. I mean, look at all the Nobel Prize winning scientists that we've lost over the generations. Imagine if they'd been around. Imagine if some of the early Nobel Prize winners who are now 300, 400 years old had been accumulating knowledge all that time. What could, where would we be scientifically now? We're having to almost reset every 80 years. We say that we stand on the shoulder of giants as scientists when we achieve something big, because we're looking back at the knowledge before. But imagine if those individuals who are remarkable could continue to accumulate that remarkable knowledge pool over time, but we continue to lose it, and that's detrimental to the species. So now we want to live longer and live better and healthier. We don't want neurodegeneration. We don't want cardiac disease. All of these things we're done with. We've moved on. We're ready to live longer.
Yeah, but like at the same time, we're building that knowledge tree. We get off the stage at 80 years. If we have everybody living to 200 or 300, wouldn't the world be a very dense place? Like the resources don't increase.
Yeah. Well, let's go back 5,000 years and look at the resources that were available then. Farming, wasn't very sophisticated. And so you could have a village of maybe 30 people and you could grow enough food to manage those 30 people. We're now 9 billion people. The technology advances with our population growth. If you've ever flown over the United States, which I know you have, and looked out the window, which I love to do, the majority of the time you're flying over emptiness. And it's like that throughout the entire world. It's mostly empty. So there's space. We only have about 8 or 9 billion people on the planet right now. We could easily fit about 40 billion people on the planet today if we needed to. But as farming technology improves, I know a lot of colleagues that are working on vertical farming. They're using various different light technologies in order to detect when plants need certain spectrums of light. So they're able to change the lighting. They're able to change the access to water, and they do it vertically. So you can put these farms miles into the sky and grow all kinds of food. Look at the ocean. The majority of the planet is ocean, and you can float farms out in those oceans or even bury them inside the ocean. There are so many opportunities to increase the population. And, a lot of my research right now is focused on aging and space, and because we age differently in space. And the idea would be, if we can get off this planet, the sky is literally not the limit anymore. Population density really is not a good argument against focusing on longevity and regenerative medicine, because we can handle the population, and the way that technology is growing, we will be able to feed the population in no problem.
Do you think, like, based on your wisdom, like what right now with the technology that is coming out there, what's the lifespan that's available to somebody who's growing up today?
So that's a tough question, because historically humans are not capable of living past 120 years. And whether you're religious or not, it was stated in the Bible that the upper limit of the human lifespan was 120 years. And
didn't they have like 800-year-old guys in the Bible?
At the beginning, like some special cases, but the lifespan of the human in the Bible was recorded to be, for the average Joe, if you're not, what was it? Was it Moses, or no, maybe not Moses. I'm not particularly religious, so I don't recall, but there were several individuals that lived like 800-900 years. But for the average Joe, the upper limit in the Bible was stated at 120. And interestingly, we've only had one recorded individual in the history of the human race living past 120, and that was a French woman, relatively recently, actually. So the upper limit currently seems to be 120. However, like many other scientists in this field, I believe the first 150-year-old and even the first 200-year-old individual has already been born and is alive today.
Even that French woman, I had read recently that some people think it was her daughter who stole the mom's identity. So now I've heard that's even iffy. So that 120 is
well, we see 100-year-olds individuals all the time. We see 110-year-olds quite frequently. We see 115-year-olds sometimes. and we very rarely see anybody above 115. So, we're pushing the upper limit. The idea, if we talk about a Gaussian distribution, and everybody's about 100 years old, you're going to get some outliers that are going to be towards that extreme of 120, pushing 120. So I don't doubt that maybe she did live to 120, but there's no way to prove it. But that's going to change soon.
It's I love talking about this, and I want to hear about the medical technologies, but it's also in the 70s, everybody was like, let's make planes faster. And they had the Concorde flying from London to New York in what, 2 hours, 3 hours?
Something like that, yeah.
And they said, let's push it faster and faster. And then they said, you know what, it's not a good idea to keep pushing it. Why don't we just focus on making these flights more comfortable? And I think about, like, with longevity, shouldn't the focus be on let's live to have an awesome life, to be about 115 or 120 and make way for the new? Or should the focus be on let's try to drive somebody to be 200, 300, and maybe a trauma will end up killing them, which will, like, an odds of a trauma are what, 1 in 200 a year?
Well, the longer you live, the greater the chances.
So even if it's possible biologically to live to 1,000, what are the odds that a war doesn't wipe you out, or a car accident doesn't wipe you out, or something else wipes you out?
So the important thing here, and we have to be very clear about this, the goal of longevity research and my research isn't to push the boundaries of human lifespan, is to improve human health span. And what we'll find is by improving human health span, by default, by accident, we'll end up improving or increasing the human lifespan. So my goal is to make sure that if we're getting to 100, we're not spending 30 years in a wheelchair or with neurodegenerative disease and just wasting away. We want high quality life longer. And in fact, a study came out recently, and I'm going to butcher the numbers here because I can't remember off the top of my head. But the gist of it is, if we're able to increase the health span of every individual in the United States by just 1 year, the health span of every citizen of the United States, we would increase, it would yield over $70 trillion in return. So that's just keeping people in the workforce. That's keeping people productive. That's keeping people healthy. That's reducing healthcare costs. $70 trillion for 1 additional year of health span. So that's a lofty goal, and also there should be some serious money behind it, because it's a game changer. If we can improve life quality for individuals just by a fraction, it's going to affect the economy huge.
So that leads me into, like, regenerative medicine and stem cells and everything behind your life's work. Is regenerative medicine, where are we in that? Are we at the beginning of that? Are we in the middle of that? And there just hasn't been a tipping point? Like, are we able to, like, use regenerative medicine? And I think we're talking about stem cells and the exosomes and everything that comes from that. Is that going to be the key to it? Or are there other things like editing genes to eliminate disease? Is it focused on the mitochondria and increasing energy? What's the secret?
Well, to answer your first question, I think we're approaching escape velocity. We're certainly not at the beginning, and we're not, at the end, or we don't have the solution. But I believe we're approaching escape velocity. There's a lot of interest right now. Altos Labs just raised $3 billion for anti-aging research, and that's remarkable. Jeff Bezos himself put in $270 million. There are labs similar to that popping up all over the place. There's a lot of energy going into anti-aging research and longevity research and health span research right now. So I think that we're accelerating. I think that we're going to reach critical mass relatively soon. That's why I believe the first 150 and 200-year-old individual is born right now, not because the technology exists, because it's coming soon. I believe that it's coming soon. And I'm currently even raising for an anti-aging research institute of my own, which is called the Space Aging Research Institute, SARI, because I want to combine the idea of space travel and aging, because we age differently in space than we do on the planet. And that's a novel tool to use to understand aging. So it's a very, very exciting time. I'm putting all my energy into it. And it's not necessarily going to come down to one thing. It's not going to come down to necessarily the mitochondria or figuring out how to reduce the accumulation of damage in our DNA. There are some secrets, and I believe that we're close to finding them. And I talk about those in my upcoming book, The Unified Theory of Life. It all comes down to that switch that I was talking about. In our bodies, we have a genetic program that tells our body, you're done. Now, that switch is critical, and nobody's talking about that switch. We understand that when we reach maturity, we start to age, we start to go gray, but nobody's really talking about the fact that there's a switch that initiates that. Yes, once we're born, we're dying, that old adage, but when we reach 20, that gap between 15 and 25, 20 years old, there's a huge metabolic switch where we change from growth to aging. And if we can understand, that little black box that's right there that tells our body we are now done growing, we have been reproductively available for a certain amount of time, and now it's time to exit. That switch right there, I believe, will be what systematically changes our body, not just looking at the mitochondria, not just looking at various different aspects of aging. It all has to come together in an interdisciplinary system. That's why my book brings together physics, chemistry, and biology together. We need an interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary approach to understand what aging is from an evolutionary point of view, and then look at that little black box and find out what's the cause.
Well, let's talk about the black box. Is it coding, like almost like computer code? Is it coding in our genes that need to be reprogrammed?
Yeah, so I believe that there are genes in our body that are sensing the environment. And once we get to a certain point, so 20 years old, those genes turn off, which then allows the rest of the body to start degrading. So if we can activate those genes and keep them going, the idea is, and I'm sort of going to give away a big part of the book here, but I think it's important to talk about it. We age because we accumulate entropy. If we talk to SENS and those guys that focus on accumulated damage, their analogy is a race car or any car, to be honest. As a car gets older, it accumulates damage, and the brakes end up giving out, the motor ends up giving out, the seats and the leather of the seat starts flaking off. But they're missing a fundamental point, and they've raised millions of dollars, but they're completely off the mark. The fundamental difference between a car and a living organism is that living organisms have the ability to shed entropy. A car cannot shed entropy. Entropy is basically the accumulation of complexity. When molecules in the universe are moving around each other, they have a tendency to come together and form something new. And that's how life happened. That's why life is inevitable all across the galaxy, all across the universe, I should say, because it's inevitable. When you have the raw materials, they have to come together. It's just part of the physics of the universe, and they come together in more complex ways. And that's how we evolved as a complex organism. However, we are still in that process. Just because we've been born doesn't remove us from that process. Like the car has been built, it's not removed from that process of entropy accumulation. And so it degrades, it breaks down. But we are unique as living organisms because we are the only things that are known in the universe to be able to shed entropy, right? We accumulate entropy. We eat food that's low in entropy because it's taking energy from the sun, it's turning it into molecules. Then we eat those, we turn those into cells, and then we take our old cells that are senescent, cross-linked, they're glycated, they're oxidized, the DNA is methylated. We remove those senescent cells, those dying cells, we defecate them out. That's us removing entropy from our body. And the difference between doing that effectively and aging is that we turn off the ability to shed entropy efficiently. And that's the take-home message. We age because we lose the ability to shed entropy efficiently.
This episode is brought to you by Gainswave. If you're a guy who is not achieving optimal performance in the bedroom, and you've tried the pills and you've tried the shots, and you're looking for an all-natural way to boost blood flow in the penis, Gainswave is evidence-based and proven. Go to gainswave.com and find a provider near you. So, I like talking about the ethics behind this, because I think I read a philosopher talking about all these advances, and he agrees that there's going to be this revolution where we can live longer, but he says initially it's going to be for the very wealthy. It's not going to be for everyone, and you're going to have this separation between like this billionaire class that can afford to move to Mars and have all these latest and greatest things, and the rest of us, because we're going to, as a planet, we're just going to keep reproducing. Is the focus making this affordable for everyone, or is there something that everyone should be doing? Like, walk through like the economics of this and how that you see that working.
Well, first of all, there is something everybody can be doing, and maybe we can touch on that after. But it is not going to be something that's only available for the rich, because historically, there's no precedence for that. If we look at diabetes drugs, or if we look at cardiovascular drugs, or any kind of drugs, look at the cost of CRISPR and CAR-T and all these things coming down. Look at the price of human genomics. Sequencing the human genome cost millions and millions of dollars for the first one, but now everybody can do it for $23. Right? So it's going to be the same thing. The first pill you make costs billions of dollars because of the technology that goes into deriving that pill. Every other pill after that costs a fraction of a cent. So all of the work that goes into it isn't going to be focused on one pill for that one rich guy, because it's going to be so cheap to make the technology available to everybody. So the money's coming from the rich, because that's the only way we're going to get it funded. It's not going to be funded by governments. It's going to be funded by independent, wealthy individuals who are interested in their longevity, because you can make as much money as you want, but you've only got 80 years, 90 years, 100 years to spend it.
Well, that says it's not going to be funded by the government, but why wouldn't, if longevity creates $70 trillion per year?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't the government be on the forefront, which they were on the forefront on vaccines, or they were on the forefront on space, well, space travel in the 1960s. They were the original, let's get this done. They put the money in. Yeah, you have to have private, but it didn't.
Space travel back then was a way to outcompete, an adversary. We were in the United States in a space race with Russia just for bragging rights, essentially.
Well, I agree with you, but I guess my point is that if there's such a benefit to society, why wouldn't the governments of the world get together and say, let's figure out, we know the science exists, we know all it needs is money.
Yeah.
Why don't they just put in the money to make people live healthier and longer, and the whole society benefits?
Mark, if you can convince the politicians of that, you're going to save millions and millions of lives. But as we know, it's not always easy to convince those who have the power to make change that these kinds of things are a good idea for them. That politics is complex, and I'm not a politician.
I'll throw in the conspiracy theory in me says, if you figured out how people don't get sick, how many pharmaceutical companies or hospitals or people that benefit off of sickness, how many of them will go out of business?
Yeah, when I was a scientist, while I was an academic, I consider myself still a scientist. I witnessed the growth of many, many new technologies in treating many, many different indications. And those technologies were sold to pharmaceutical companies and shelved. And I didn't believe that sort of thing happened at the time, but then I witnessed it and I realized the advances that we make often don't go anywhere because of greed. That's the reality of it. Pharmaceutical companies don't have an interest in doing anything that relates to curing individuals because they make so much money treating patients. And there's nothing we can do about it because they have billions and billions of dollars. They have lobbyists, they have power, and we are just a bunch of scientists trying to change the world. So we don't have any traction there. And it really will take a revolution, whether it's from the populace or whether it's from the politicians, to make a change. And we have to say, this works. You know what the FDA situation is like in the United States right now. It's almost impossible to do anything with regenerative medicine, despite all the data, because there's just not the money available, and nobody will put money in because they don't think it will go anywhere, because the FDA there's no precedence with the FDA that the FDA will really allow this. So we're caught in a catch-22.
Well, so like in the US, for example, who opposes regenerative medicine? Is it coming from big pharma because they don't really have a say, or is it coming from special interest groups?
Well, you can't really patent a lot of regenerative medicine because most of the regenerative medicine, at least the regenerative medicine that I work with, is naturally occurring, and you can just access it if you pop down your local doctor's office. Pharmaceutical companies are interested in $100 million, $200 million clinical trials to prove the safety and efficacy of a drug that they will then make billions and billions of dollars from. Amniotic fluid has been used in medicine for over 100 years, effectively and safely, and it's very, very cheap to access. And so if we were to move in that direction, it would put a lot of pharmaceutical businesses out of business. So I don't know the politics of all that, but I can only imagine that that's got to be a pressure point, especially when they have the ears of all the politicians. But if we just wiped all that clean and that all those guys went away, we would start working on regenerative medicine immediately, and patients would start seeing the results immediately, and longevity would improve, health span would improve. We would improve the quality of lives of millions and millions of people, but we have our hands tied behind our back for the most part.
Well, even when it comes to things like diet, and I thought this was fascinating, was when COVID first broke out, scientists identified, correlated real quick, and I think you and I may have talked about this when we were in Las Vegas, that if you were obese, your chances of dying or having long COVID like exponentially went way up.
Yeah.
Yet people that would talk about that, they would get censored really quick. Like you couldn't go out and you were fat shaming if you were going out and saying, look, if you don't want to die, lose weight. And we know, or at least I think maybe you can talk about what it is we eat, because we know about calorie restriction increases longevity. I think there's correlation there. There is obesity, an epidemic of obesity that nobody's really talking about. What can we do to help us live a healthier lifestyle that doesn't quite involve regenerative medicine yet?
Yeah, well, I have a lot to say about that. First of all, when we're talking about COVID, I've heard of clinics being raided by the FBI for simply providing high-dose vitamin C IV. And when I had COVID, I immediately went to my local IV therapy clinic, and I had 50 grams of vitamin C daily. You can't overdose on vitamin C. You can end up getting, diarrhea, but you can't overdose on vitamin C. But it's clear that vitamin C helps fight viruses and other pathogens, and especially helping modulate the immune system. So the fact that this guy got raided for offering vitamin C to COVID patients is an indication of the uphill struggle that we have. But moving on from that, we know that there are false narratives. Look at how ridiculous it is that you can go get a burger for $1, but you pay $7 for a salad. That's how ridiculous the situation is, because burgers are bad for you, no matter what anybody says. And they're bad for you for many, many reasons. The biggest reason they're bad for you is preservatives, the cooking process with the oils, because you end up causing AGEs. These are the age-related glycan events. And the sugars, which cause glycation as well, and oxidation. So all these things, cooking in oil causes the oil to oxidize, which is inflammatory. Eating meat that's been burnt is inflammatory. All these things are inflammatory. We're talking about the obesity issue in the United States. It has nothing to do, or very little, I should say, very, very little to do with caloric imbalance. And all the dietitians out there talking about the obesity epidemic, we're looking at the wrong thing. It has very little to do with caloric imbalance, that meaning you're eating too much and you're not exercising enough. It's not that. What it is the inflammation that's caused by the crap they're eating, right? So if you eat salad all day long, eventually you're going to get an inflammatory response against that. But people are drinking Coca-Cola. I don't mean to use a brand, but they're drinking soda. These big, massive gulp things of soda, so much sugar. All that sugar in your body causes glycation events, which causes inflammation. The food we eat, all the junk food, the pizzas, the burgers, all those baked things cause inflammation because of the glycation. Now, the way the body responds to injury is by making adipose. If you have a heart attack, your heart becomes covered in epicardial adipose. And we used to think that was a prognostic. If we looked at somebody's heart after a heart attack, we'd say, look at all that fat around your heart. No wonder you had a heart attack. But in fact, what it turns out is that all that fat is in response to the injury the heart is suffering, because the body makes fat as an energy source, as a sort of source of growth factors. And we know in regenerative medicine, there's a lot of regenerative components in adipose, especially the vascular fraction. So when the body is insulted, when it's damaged, it makes adipose. So these people who are obese are chronically inflamed. Their body is under assault, it's damaged, and it's responding by making fat. It's not just storing fat, it's making fat in response, saying we're constantly under attack, keep making adipose. So if we want to deal with this this obesity epidemic, one of the things we need to do is, first of all, cut out all sugar from the diet, as much sugar as possible. Fruit, and unfortunately fructose in fruit is one of the worst sugar forms that we can eat, because it's one of the it's one of the worst contributors to glycation. However, there are so many other benefits to fruit that it's worthwhile doing. It's worthwhile eating fruit and taking in that fructose. But when we eat table sugar, that's glucose and fructose, right? So that now we're in a lot of trouble. When we eat all this other junk food that's high in high fructose corn syrup, it's not fruit. It's a Twinkie bar, but it's high in high fructose corn syrup. That fructose is terrible for the body. It causes so much inflammation that you can't but do anything else but make fat, make adipose, and you become obese. So the first thing to do is cut out all sugars. If you're going to have sugars, eat blueberries, other fruits like that. You need to cut out a lot of foods that are cooked over heat. So I love steak, and I'm never going to stop eating steak, but I have cut down on steaks because that browning on top of the steak, that's glycation. Those proteins are now cross-linked and glycated. When you consume them, you can't break them down. So for the most part, you're malnutrition, you're malnourished because you can't absorb a lot of those proteins. The ones that are broken down, you absorb, and those get directly translated into your cells. So you've got these damaged proteins, these glycated proteins entering your cells, making crappy old cells in your body every single day, instead of taking fresh fruit off the tree, using those cells, those proteins in your body to make fresh new cells, which then again helps you remove the entropy from your body. That's the secret. I've just blown my entire book. Nobody's going to buy it now.
Don't worry. I don't think it's as big of a podcast that it'll affect sales too much. Plus, anybody listening to this is going to be interested. They're going to want to know all the details. But you hear people that they want to live to be 120, 130, but they also want the good life. They want to eat the burgers and the steaks. Now, does regenerative medicine and everything science is working on, like they going back to like, let's eat better, but instead they work on, well, you can eat what you want, but if you take this pill or do this or that, that's going to eliminate the obesity. Is that regenerative medicine going to help us live an unhealthy lifestyle? Does it only work when we live a healthy lifestyle?
No, unfortunately, even living a healthy lifestyle, we're screwed. Until we find that black box, there's nothing we can do. We can slow it down and we can improve the quality of the end. And in fact, we can improve the quality now. You and I are, sort of midlife area. If we start eating healthier, I don't know how you eat, I'm sure you eat very healthy, but individuals our age, if they start eating healthier now, they're going to find they have less joint pain. They're going to find that they have less obesity. They're going to find that they sleep better, less brain fog, more acute thinking, better eyesight, all these things, because you're not putting the adage, you are what you eat. it's absolutely true. If you put junk in, you're going to make junk cells in your body, and you're going to be living as junk. We replace our cells all the time, like 300 million cells per minute. So if you're only eating burgers, you're taking all that glycated protein, all that oxidized fatty acids and everything, and you're making new cells with that stuff. So those are inflammatory. You're going to be in a chronic state of inflammation. So you can improve the quality of your life right now by changing your habits, and you can still have a very enjoyable life. You don't have to eat steak every day. Make it a special occasion and have a really good steak. Go to a good steakhouse and spend $100 on a steak instead of $19 every weekend at your local steakhouse. But you can improve the quality right now. But until we find that black box that I'm looking for, we're not going to be able to open the doors and just say, okay, eat healthy and you can live to 200 years old. We still cannot get past 120 years right now.
Yeah, and I think it is a good point. Like with steak, I talked to a doctor who was saying, like, eat grass-fed steak, like eat natural. It's not so much the steak, it's the quality of the steak. It's the corn-fed steak that's pumped full of antibiotics.
They are what they eat too. So if the cow is eating junk and then you eat the junk cow, you become junk. Right. So, eat younger cows, because older cows are accumulating entropy too. In all their muscle cells, they're accumulating this entropy that will translate directly into our cells. So, the younger stuff you eat, the better. That's why fruit fresh off a tree, carrots straight out of the ground. If you're going to eat animals, eat young animals. Don't eat things like, I love salmon. I'm going to continue eating salmon, but reduce it, because they're predatory fish, and so everything they eat accumulates in their body as far as the entropy, and not only that, the heavy metals and all that other junk. So eat young. The chapter in my book that addresses this is called Eat the Sun, because the idea is eat as close as you can to the sun. The sun is the lowest form of entropy in our solar system, and we can't consume energy from the sun, but the plants can. So if we eat the plants, we're taking in this low entropy food, and we're turning our cells younger just by the food we eat.
So the vegans will all, and I went through a year where I ate nothing but veggies. I cut out all meats, and I did feel healthier, but I did miss that good steak, and I've kind of fallen off that. But
you should still have that occasionally. But again, it's not just eating the vegetables, it's eating fresh vegetables. You need to go to farmers markets or Whole Foods, these places where it's fresh out of the ground, because if you cut off your arm, it degrades really quick, right? The reason they leave the tops on carrots is because it's still transferring entropy from the food to the stalk. And so it's pulling out all the old stuff and putting in new stuff. Once you cut the top of the carrot is aging, just like your arm is aging when you cut it off. So it's degrading, it's accumulating entropy. And so yes, it's vegetable, and you're going to get a lot of minerals and vitamins from it, but it's not as good for you as it is straight out of the ground. Pull it out of the ground, wash it off, and eat it. That's the best thing you can do.
I love talking to you, because I never know where it's going to go. Now that it went to carrots, I think because I don't want to give any more secrets out. So the Unified Theory of Life, your new book, it's coming out when?
Well, I've been so busy with the company that I've neglected writing anymore for the past few months. So it was scheduled to come out at the end of the year. I still hope to get back to it by the end of the year. So that's the goal. I just need to get some additional help here to take some things off my plate.
That's the case for why we should live longer. You'll have more people in the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well,
Dr. Ian White, I appreciate your time. It's always enlightening, and it's fun.
Yeah, well, I enjoy it, Mark. It's a good opportunity to just shoot from the hip and talk about this stuff in a way that is exciting, and I hope the listeners here are excited by it. If anybody out there is interested in learning more, I speak regularly. I'm speaking at RadFest in San Diego in October, where I'm going to be introducing these ideas for the first time publicly. Look out for my book, and if you're interested in investing, let's talk. The more money we have, the faster we can do this.
That's they can go to your site. It's the TACRM site.
So yeah, my company website is neobiosis.com. I'm also the vice president of the American College of Regenerative Medicine, which is TACRM.org.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Doctor.
You're welcome, Mark. Talk to you soon.
Bye.